Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's WorkSafe webinar. It is great to have you with us as part of the 2021 Health and Safety Month. My name is Cameron Ling, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Now, while our program of sessions are virtual, we still have the same aims of Health and Safety Month every single year, which is to keep you up to date. This year, our theme is You Learn Something New Every Day. Our session this morning covers the latest updates about major safety topics that can impact your bottom line and the safety of yourself and your mates at work on the work site. The session will feature a range of important topics and provide solutions and more resources for you if you'd like any more information. The topics that will be covered this morning are falls, working at heights, working with electricity, and safe work method statements, or SWMS, and why they are so important. There's going to be plenty of time for questions at the end of this webinar. It's time to welcome our expert panellists for this webinar. First up, Brian Chamberlain, Construction Industry Education Officer, Inspector for WorkSafe Victoria. Good morning, Brian.
Morning, Lingy. Morning, everyone. Good to be here.
Great to have you with us, Brian. It's fantastic. Yeah. We've also got Paul Williams joining us, Chairman of the Victorian Volume Home Building Safety Alliance. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Lingy. How are you going?
Very well, thank you. Great to have you with us as well. And also Sam Smith, OHS Manager, Master Builders Association Victoria. Good morning, Sam.
Thanks, Lingy. Great to be here.
Now, before I get to a little bit of background, the building and construction sector is the state's largest full-time employer, accounting for nearly 10% of workers. Every year, WorkSafe Victoria sees dozens of incidents, making the sector the largest that we support. To start the ball rolling, can I welcome you, Brian, for a WorkSafe overview? What are the three key workplace issues we'll be discussing today, and why are they so important to get these out on the table?
Yeah, thanks, Lingy. It is good to be here, and I guess construction, I think, firstly, probably one of the key things, and the reason we're here too for obviously Health and Safety Month, and the reason we need to get things out there is basically, obviously, too many people are seriously or fatally injured at work in construction due to these things. Firstly, falls. It's a number one thing. Working at heights is a common task in construction. Yet we still see the same type of incidents occurring on a regular basis. Over a 2-year period, we saw approximately 360 falls notified to WorkSafe, 6 of which were fatal. And unfortunately, too, one of the key things I think is the vast majority of those falls are less than 4 metres, which is working off ladders and things like that. So, working at heights and falls, they're one of those things that are done on a regular basis, but I just don't think people really understand the full implications of what's happening out there. That's one every 2 days. When we look at electricity, since beginning of 2019, we've had around 350 incidents involving electricity notified to WorkSafe as well, which is approximately about 1 every 3 days, and around 6 fatalities in that number as well. So again, it's one of those things where I think with electricity, we can't see it, can't hear it, can't smell it. And I think a lot of people will get a little bit closer to those type of things if they can't see what's there. Then there's also the need to implement the appropriate controls and make sure that people understand what controls need to be implemented in that construction environment. The SWMS, which you mentioned earlier as well, or safe work method statements, employers need to make sure that they're simple, they're used by workers, they're readily accessible, comprehensible to those people using them, and that they work so that they're a live document that people understand and know how to use them. And I guess that's probably, what we're going to break into a little bit more today and talk about.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brian. Some of those stats are still alarming, especially when you talk about falls and electricity as well. Over to you, Paul, for a second. You are chair of the Victorian Volume Home Building Safety Alliance. The Alliance works with all stakeholders to continuously improve OH&S performance and to contribute a positive safety culture within the domestic construction sector. Although fewer workers have been on site over this recent pandemic period, why are these issues still so significant to your members?
Yeah, thanks, Lingy. Look, my members have a responsibility to provide a safe working environment, and in most cases they do. However, a builder may provide education, training and advice, but they can't provide 100% supervision all the time. It's just simply not practical. So we rely on the workforce to use the controls that we've together identified. It's often a situation where someone works outside of those control measures that are implemented to provide that safe work environment. And it may also be control measures yet to be installed. And if that's the case, if it's not ready, just don't start.
That's a good point, Paul. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Turning to you, Sam, now, OH&S has always been a key focus of the Master Builders Association Victoria. Your members look to you for advice and support, not only around risks in a workplace, but to help business livelihoods as well. Could you explain the financial risk of not following good OH&S practice?
Yeah, look, the cost of something is an excuse that people use far too often for not selecting a better control measure. Safety isn't always expensive, especially when you consider the efficiencies that you can gain from better systems of work. Poor safety practices can have a significant financial impact on a business. I'm talking about damage to people, property, and reputation. And speaking about reputation, clients, customers are far less likely to want to do business with someone that has a poor reputation for safety. It can be viewed also as an indication of other shortcuts that might be taken. When we're talking about damage to materials and equipment, injuries to workers, and incident investigations, well, they can all cause costly delays to a project too.
That's a good point you make there, Sam. And I want to stay with you for a second. The industry faces a range of physical risks. What about the legal and, I suppose, personal impacts as well?
Yep. Look, if someone is injured, there can be significant impacts on the employer's work cover premium and potentially life-altering injuries for the worker. WorkSafe have a range of powers, including the ability to issue infringement notices or fines for certain offences and the potential for prosecution for more serious offences too. The legal fees associated with the prosecution are a bit of a forgotten cost associated too, and they're regularly more, many times the cost of any fine imposed by the courts. But we've talked about dollars a lot. The personal cost is the greatest of them all. Now, I've seen and spoken to people who were physically healthy but unable to continue working when they believe they contributed towards someone else getting hurt. And the impact of an incident also extends far beyond the workplace and the individual, but to the family and the friends who want to see you return home safely each and every day.
Having heard all of that, Brian, I've got to ask the question, why do work sites still face these risks? They seem to have been around for a while, but what are the challenges that people face in their workplaces, and are they a constant?
Yeah, Ling, I think it's a great point. I come from a trade background myself, and my father was in a trade. He was a carpenter building supervisor as well. So I've sort of been around construction my whole life and in different aspects of it as well. But the things that we're talking about here, I mean, for falls, like things like people falling down stair voids in double-storey houses. We've been building double-storey houses for a long, long time, and people have been falling down them for a long, long time. Yet we don't sort of recognise sometimes how simple it can be to actually change up those situations. Electricity's been around for a long time. People have been electrocuted for a long time. And as you say, they're constant things that just keep bobbing up. And from a WorkSafe point of view and a trade point of view, yes, I've probably been in those situations where, I put myself at risk at times back in the day, but I look at it now and you just think it was so, probably lucky in a lot of ways. But then looking at what we see now, it's a bit of a no-brainer when you think about how easy it is, as Sam just said, the money side of things, like a stair void platform costs around $400 to hire. But what might happen is they've got to get the job done. So time restraints don't allow them the time to actually put the stair void platform in while the trades are working there. So off it goes. Or there is that money factor where someone's trying to save that little bit of money. Or you may have a worker working on the site with lack of training and lack of awareness. There's a lot of young workers out there. There's a lot of young business owners out there now running businesses that maybe aren't aware of the implications of what we're talking about here. There's a lack of supervision. There may be no one there to stop the works if it's not being done right. Obviously, Paul talks about these workers on site and obviously the master builders members. There's got to be someone there to actually stop the process sometimes. Builders may not be organised or prepared to pay for the controls. Clients putting pressure on to get the job done. And then there's always some of those factors that'll never change, which is, and we hear it a fair bit from a WorkSafe point of view, is that attitude that it won't happen to me and I've been doing it like this for years and we've never had an issue with it. And that often comes to the front as well.
Yeah, it's a good point, Brian. Thank you for that. Paul, Brian just mentioned two of the major risks that do happen on building sites, electricity and falls. Are there any myths around these risks that you'd like to bust right now?
Yeah, there is. I'll probably start with the falls. And look, one of the myths I can think of is that, and I've heard this lots, I'll just quickly get up there, I won't be long. I've got to say the length of time has no impact on the actual event. Myth number two would be, like Brian suggested, I've been doing this for over 20 years. Again, I'd say the length of time you've been lucky for does not exclude you from a life-changing event. Myth number three would be, only the apprentices need to wear gloves because the fully qualified guys know what they're doing. I'm sorry, I've just had too many examples where that's just not the case. I might pass over to Sam, though, to, comment on the electrical stuff, if you don't mind.
I sure can. And look, I think yourself and Brian have covered off one big myth, which is a reliance on luck. Just as you said, I've been doing it this way for a long period of time. Doesn't mean it won't go wrong today or tomorrow. When we're talking about electrical, and in particular in the renovation space, workers need to know that working with wiring means to always treat it as live, especially if you're working in roof cavities or considering any demolition work. Make sure those circuits have been isolated, secured and communicated to everyone else on site. Consider the tools and equipment that are being used as well. The increase in use of battery tools and lights has reduced the need to keep mains power on whilst working in those spaces. And certainly if we're talking about heights too, lower heights, there's a presumption that if I'm not working at 2 metres, then it must be safe. But no, a fall from even moderate heights can leave workers with permanent and debilitating injuries. And in some instances, they can also be fatal.
I'll go back to you, Paul, on a bit of this. Safe work method statements, or SWMs, are vital for businesses to create this safe workplace that we're talking about. It's a big risk if it's not done properly. What does an up-to-date, comprehensive and readily accessible SWMs look like?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a great question. Look, a safe work method statement's no more than 3 things. Essentially, it's what are you doing? What's the worst thing that can happen as a result of that task? And how are you going to stop that thing from happening? Now, clearly, there are many instances where the details of these points will need a comprehensive review and further explanation. However, this is the basis for all SWMs. The biggest risk to our industry is overcomplicating a SWMs to the point where the people it's designed to protect don't read it because it's simply not practical and it's outside their particular skill set. So where there is a need to document a comprehensive process, then an induction into that SWMs must take place. So the people involved can hand on heart actually acknowledge comprehension of it. Now, there are 19 specific activities defined as high-risk construction work, and a safe work method statement covers these activities to ensure workers' safety on construction sites. Now, the WorkSafe website has actually got a really good template that you can tailor to your needs, but I've got to say, if you're going to use a generic safe work method statement, you want to make it site-specific because every site and every project has got specific risks associated with it, and you want to make sure that when you design that, you take ownership of it and make it yours.
Well, Brian, what is WorkSafe doing here to help educate and re-educate the sector around these major risk factors that yourself and Sam and Paul have all been talking about, and to help them maintain compliance and protect their workers?
Yeah, again, Lingy, good. good sort of question there. I guess we try and do as much as obviously as we possibly can from a WorkSafe point of view. We're out there obviously to regulate the industry probably is number one, and to make sure that employers and employees are doing all the right things wherever they possibly can or we can be anyway. One of the common things around when I go in and in my position, I reckon I'm pretty lucky what I do going around trying to educate the industry. I spend a lot of time with apprentices in TAFEs and builders registration courses and things like that. And a lot of it is talking about this sort of stuff. What is a SWIMS? What does it need to contain? And there is a real confusion about the industry. A lot of times about, oh no, watch out for WorkSafe. And there's that mentality that we're there to try and stop people from working, whereas we actually want to keep them working, but we want to minimise the risk. So it's educating the industry and trying to change that little bit of a mindset. And it's funny when you're talking to a group of apprentice plumbers or something like that, and we start talking about falls, and you got a 16-year-old kid who says that we stopped them from working and all that sort of stuff. But, and you say, why is that? Oh, we're up on the roof. Why did we get you down? Oh, there was no handrail. Okay, well, is it okay for a boss to put you up there on a roof without a handrail when you're 16? Who's the one doing the right thing? The guy getting you down off the roof, or the guy putting you up there? And it's just changing that mindset to slowly, when you see them, get it, that we're actually there to try and help them. And we're also there to try and help the builders as well. I mean, at the end of the day, Sam's mentioned it, they're putting their livelihoods on the line. So it's important that they understand what their obligations are as well. So we'd probably run around pre-COVID around 180 presentations a year through TAFEs and different RTOs and places like that to try and educate. As Paul just mentioned, there's a new SWIMS being developed, which we're doing with Small Business Victoria to try and make things simpler. We run campaigns. We've had a recent six-week blitz on falls to try to regulate and educate the industry. We do a lot of social media campaigns and things like that as well, and try and get a lot of education materials out there. It's basically just trying to get out and to raise awareness more than anything.
Very important. Absolutely, Brian. And really appreciate all of your insights, the three of you. The questions are firing in left, right and centre. So I'd love to get to some of those questions now that the audience is sending through. I will get to as many as I possibly can, but keep them coming in. First one, and there's been a lot of people wanting to ask this question. What does a good SWIMS look like? Paul, I mean, you touched on it a little bit. Clear and concise, is that right?
Yeah, it's got to identify all of the significant risks and hazards involved, and then putting those control measures in place to deal with them. So, there are going to be some generic things that a lot of SWIMS will always have, UV and UV protection, but the key issues need to be addressed. And if it's a fall from height, then your control measures got to be listed, and it might be a passive fall protection. If you can't do that, what's the next step? And again, all of this is about really following the hierarchy of controls, and that will give you some clear guidance as to what is the best method.
Next question on here. Sorry, Sam, you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, and I support Paul's comments too. How you go about truss erection or framing or pouring a slab or whatever the activity might be is pretty consistent from site to site. So there's nothing wrong starting with that basic building blocks in your SWIMS. You've got that methodology pretty well sorted out, but the next step that you need to go through is customise it, especially when you get to site. If you've said that you're going to be working from scaffold, but it's not present on site, well, cross it out. What are we actually doing here today? Write it in, pen, pencil, crayon if you've got it, but make those amendments to the SWIMS as you go. Make sure that address is on it. Keep it present and relevant to the site that you're on. Shorter is better too. A 10, 20-page document, it's overwhelming. Your workers can't possibly be expected to remember every single detail that's in there. So if you can really focus on that high-risk construction work and the things that are really important that you get right, that's the basics of a good SWIMS.
If I can throw my bit in there, sorry, mate. I'll quickly throw my bit in there, and both of those guys are spot on. And from a worksafe point of view, for me as a chippy point of view, I look at it and go, well, it's got to be simple. It has to be understandable, as it says in our regs. Identifies the hazards, the risk controls, how they're going to be implemented, and understandable. So anyone needs to understand it. And like a lot of times we sort of say to people, don't focus so much on the actual swims. That's only a piece of paper. Focus on the control you're going to put in place. And if you look at it that way, from a practical chipping point of view, that control is what you're going to write on that swims. So if you think of it that way, that's it. And then implement it, which is the key. And a lot of times we do see, just as Sam mentioned, 3 or 4 different controls on a swims, but none of them are being used because no one actually knows what to do.
Brian, can I stay with you for the next question here? And again, a number of people have wanted this one answered. I work for a small company. Can I be a health and safety rep? Is there any restrictions to how many workers can have a health and safety rep on site?
Health and safety rep is generally elected to represent a DWG. So on a small business, a lot of times there's not that space or that structure for that health and safety rep specifically. What I would suggest on a small business, depending on the size, would be to employ someone or someone as more of a health and safety management or officer, if you like, or someone to look after the OH&S that could be qualified in OH&S. But if it's a structured workplace and they do have a designated work group and then they vote in a health and safety rep, that can be done. And they can represent, 2, 3 workers.
And there is training
that answers the question.
There is WorkSafe provide training for the health and safety reps as well, from what I understand.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. There's a 5-day initial OH&S health and safety reps course. It can be done. And then there's 1-day refreshers after that, which are usually done yearly.
Thank you for that. Next question, probably just jumping back to our first question around the swims. And I might put this one to you, Sam. How can you be sure that everyone on site has an understanding of the swims? You outlined what a good one should have, but how do you know that everyone on site understands that swims?
That understanding is really, really important. Typically what we see is, so during the worker induction to the site or upon first arrival, that swims might be reviewed. But the most important time, I guess, to get workers involved is in the creation of swims. If they've got a stake or an understanding of what's being put in there in the first place, they're more likely to implement it when they're actually going about doing their job. So get the workers involved in creation of that swims. If you have a HSR, as was referred to before, yes, they really need to be involved in that consultative process right from the start. They would be there representing the workers. You can have other workers involved too, but get their hands all over that document in terms of creating it. And then when you're reviewing it too, if you're changing processes in that workplace, their involvement is really important in all of those stages.
Paul, have you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the consultation is really important. And one of the things we find on site is that when the relevant trades bring their safe work method statements to site, the supervisor will often review that to make sure that, all the key risks and hazards are identified. And that's where we, get to have an involvement with the trade actually performing the task. At that point, the supervisors will also make sure that the people that are involved in that task understand it. And again, the key word here is consultation. And you can't have enough of that. And, a pre-start meeting, a toolbox meeting, just to reaffirm, all the key issues in it. And swims is great too from the supervisor's point of view, because often our supervisors won't necessarily know the specific task. We won't have the skill sets in what is being delivered on site because we've engaged a professional company to come and do that. It's important that the supervisor gets to understand what the measures have been, determined by the company that's providing that service. So that's what the swims is also really good for. It's sharing the information about what is actually needed on site, and the supervisor can go about making sure that it's actually in place before it starts.
I'm happy to open up this next question to any of you, and please feel free to jump in. Could we maybe increase OH&S questions into a builder's registration process so they have a better knowledge?
I think I could probably come and answer that there, Cameron, maybe. I think if that's a reference to, your builder's registration course and that sort of thing, I think, and coming from a background as well, part of what I did before I joined WorkSafe was actually work in TAFE and taught some of those subjects through that builder's registration course. And I think one of the key things that I find through the whole process when we do a trade or something along those lines is the fact that we talk about OHS a lot, but sometimes we don't dig right down into the mechanisms of some of the workings of what we're talking about here. So we say that we need a lot of these things and they need to be in place, and we'll send someone out in a builder's registration course, and part of the assignment for an OHS unit is they have to have so many swims and to be able to show that they understand what they are. But then once they get out and become that registered builder, then all of a sudden they're working documents. And that's where, from my experience, that understanding of how they actually work really falls down. They know they have them, but they don't actually understand the processes that need to be gone through. And I think, I have a bit of I suppose, doing a lot of stuff around TAFEs and in a lot of the construction courses and that. We talk in Victoria, they talk a lot about WHS, which is obviously nationally recognised, whereas we're Victorian OH&S, Occupational Health and Safety Act of Victoria. So sometimes it gets lost a little bit with the translation of what's actually required in our state, if you like. So it does get brushed over a bit. And I think there's a real, we could also go into the registration of trades and upskilling and that sort of thing as well, which happens in under some other regulators, I guess, and other states, and that increases the OHS knowledge of the builders and those people that are running these jobs as well. And I think that could be a really good process for us too here. So, yeah, I honestly agree with that, and how we do it is probably the problem at the moment.
Well, the next question perhaps flows on from that, Brian, and I'm happy to open it up to any of you to answer this one. A number of people listening wanting this one answered. Is there any strategy for improving the education and safety culture within the construction industry? It's probably flowing on from what you're talking about there, Brian, a real strategy for this.
Yeah, I've probably got a look. You can probably tell I got a little bit of I'm passionate about this, and I suppose it's my role, and I get a little bit, frustrated with some of what I see around, and I wish there was an answer where I could say, yes, we're going to do this, or yes, we're going to do that. I mean, I'm always pushing to try and help people along the way, and I think there's a lot that we can do to help educate our industry. Right from grassroots all the way through, we tend to, I think, and I'll be happy to have these guys' opinions as well, Paul and Sam, but I think in a lot of ways we're dumbing down some of our trades by not giving them a real overall view of becoming tradesmen and business owners anymore. Now, when I say that, a lot of trades are very, you start a trade as a carpenter and it's very specific. It may be putting walls and trusses up. And you look back at renovation work's completely different. We talk about electrical work. You could be on a large commercial site where you're running cable trays and pulling cables through, and you go onto a domestic site and again do that renovation work where you've got to isolate power. You've got to, part of the house might still be live while you're working in another part, and making sure there's so many different aspects to a lot of the trades, and sometimes they're not all covered off. I think the other guys probably might be able to have a say on some of that as well.
Yeah, look, I think the issue of the industry educating, the Victorian Volume Builders are a group of OH&S managers that get together, and we have input from the Housing Industry Association, the Master Builders, and we have representation from WorkSafe. We are non-stop trying to improve the industry, and we are running programs at all times to try and educate the trades, to give them opportunities. We're looking at, the next step in the evolution of wearing gloves on site in the domestic market is just, unheard of. Whereas in all the other larger industries, they're well used and frequently used, but our industry needs to, evolve. And part of the groups that we have and and the organisations, even WorkSafe run all the time, Foundations for Safety, they're all designed to constantly improve the industry. So there is work in that area.
I know where Sam's going, but there is another thing too. I mean, there's differences in the way training is implemented as well. So there's on-site, there's block release where apprentices will go in for a week, and then there's also blended learning or self-paced learning. So there's a whole different range of learning out there for trades and that. So the consistency sometimes isn't always there as well.
Just going to give credit where credit's due, but there's a lot of resources and information available out there, and it's not about being perfect right from day one, but show us that you're trying. Keep working on that continuous improvement process. You say, look, I'm not sure how to do this, or I'm not sure if we're doing everything that we could. Let's do some research. There's lots of information sheets and industry standards and whatever else there might be on WorkSafe's website. Have a go, have a search. WorkSafe also offer a program that's free for small and medium-sized businesses called OHS Essentials. And that's not just for construction, but small business generally, where it provides access to free OHS advice, and you can, if you search for OHS Essentials, it'll pop up pretty quickly.
Sam, if I can get you to continue on here, and this next question, a number of people would like it answered as well, and I think it's being asked from a really practical point of view. On site, on a day-to-day work, the question is, can a boss force a worker to do unsafe work tasks? Can workers speak up and refuse if it's unsafe? The answer seems obvious to everything that we're talking about here, but in a practical sense, on a work site, can a worker really speak up and say no?
Yes, they can. Sorry, there's two questions. The answer to the can you force someone to do something that's unsafe? Well, the answer there is no. And can someone speak up? Yes. And everyone has the right to call WorkSafe to come out and assist with that decision-making process and issue resolution on site. It is an offence to discriminate against people for raising safety concerns too. So I'd encourage people to speak up and raise those concerns, and maybe I'm optimistic, but perhaps someone's asking you to do something unsafe because they're not aware of the hazards and you're the expert in that job. If you're bringing it to their attention, it gives everyone the opportunity to correct it and put some control measures in place to make it safe, not just for you, but for other people on that site too.
Can I just add into that, Sam's comments? I agree with 100%. I think the other thing is that we've really got to pass that message on to the trades. No one is going to pay you enough to risk your life at work. I don't care what anyone says. If you're not comfortable with it, don't do it. The biggest issue I found is that no one wants to stand up and put their hand up and say, look, I'm actually not sure that this is the right thing to do here. You've got to run to the supervisor straight away and say, listen, I'm not comfortable with this. I can tell you now, in most cases, and particularly with the volume building group, people will say, hell, what are you doing? Yeah, I agree. Let's not do that. That's wrong. We need to address it. So, stand up and take some responsibility for yourself, but also, share it where it's wrong. You got to pass that message on, and the builders will always, in most cases, will address it, and with the best intentions.
I think that with the next question, and I might pose this one to you, Brian, perhaps a little example of what Paul and Sam are talking about there. This is from Peter, and thanks to the question, a number of people have wanted it answered as well. In tertiary education, for larger construction projects, i.e. closed sites, incidents have occurred where live electrical cables were left in the ceiling spaces, not terminated correctly, making the ceiling grid live. Our electricians identify the issue, but how can we tackle this issue up front?
Okay, all right. I'm just trying to think through that, and that is a common incident that probably does come through where the electrical works are supposed to have been isolated in a certain area on a large site, and then someone does get up, touch the ceiling grid, and cop a bit of a shock. I guess from an electrical point of view, if you're doing the works, and it's a matter of going back and testing it to make sure that it is isolated, which should be one of the processes. I think as you go through, obviously working your live electrical installations is high risk construction work. The safe work method statement would be to go through, isolate, and then it should also, at the end of that job, to be able to make sure that it's tested to make sure that it obviously is isolated. Without looking at the situation and without sort of going through the process that's been carried out and to where the power is coming from, it may be another feed from a different source or something along those lines. So, I mean, if the electrician's identifying it, then it definitely should be isolated again. I think that answers the question, or part of what the question was, Lingy. Does that sound like it has? I mean,
I think it has, Brian. I will keep an eye on the questions if there's a follow-up one to that. Yeah. While I've got you, though, there is a question here from a number of people. Do WorkSafe inspectors work on the weekends? Often dodgy work practices happen on the weekend.
Yeah. Yes, we do. We have what we call our emergency response. So our general hours for WorkSafe inspector are between 7 and 7, 5 days a week. And then we have an after hours roster. So after those hours, there's generally someone that would be on call. What we do from a construction program point of view is every so often we will actually work on weekends and just go out and target things like falls or any issues that we're having that we want to sort of crack down on. We know this time of year, obviously people start to get busy and probably do more work on weekends. So, we do sort of tend to try and get out there as much as possible.
Oh, great. Thank you for that, Brian. I'll probably go one more question here. Sorry to anyone who I don't get to their question, but this one just interested me. We've been talking a lot about safe work method statements. A company with no knowledge of working at heights engages a contractor to perform work. Who is responsible for making sure the SWMS is correct? And how is a company, again, with no knowledge of working at heights, expected to know the SWMS is correct and the contractor is adhering to it?
I think I can take that one, I guess. From a WorkSafe point of view, if you're working in an industry, it doesn't matter sort of, I guess, what industry it is. If you're running a business and you're engaging people to do works for you, then you have an obligation to know what the obligations in that industry are. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your livelihood. That's where you make your money. You should understand what those obligations are. For us, as we say, our Act talks about what's reasonably practicable. You can jump on our website. There's compliance codes, 2 compliance codes, which are readily accessible for falls. There's fact sheets out there that can give you a lot of information on what should be done. Our compliance codes show pictures of how things should be done. If that's the case, Sam mentioned the OHS Safety Essentials program earlier. If someone thinks that they have no knowledge in something, then they need to go out and to find as much knowledge on that process as they possibly can so that they can look at that. At the end of the day, a principal contractor or a builder is not going to be able to get rid of their obligations. If they've got someone engaging someone, they're going to have to make sure they do know.
And there's 2 industry bodies that will help with that, both HIA and the master builders. You just make a phone call and they'll be able to provide you with all the information that you need.
Great. Thank you for that. And thank you to the 3 of you for answering those questions. Thanks to everyone who sent them in. I need to finish things up, but before we do, the title of this webinar was around 3 ways you can save a mate's life on site and protect your business from exposure. So to the 3 of you, what is the one message you'd have for our audience today? Starting with you, Paul.
I just want to reiterate what I've already said. No one pays you enough to expose yourself to any incident at work. Take responsibility for yourself and address the issue with the builders. If it's not safe, just don't bloody do it. That's pretty much it for me.
Well, thanks for that, Paul. It's a great point you make. And what about you, Sam?
Consultation is key. Talk to the workers about how to do the job safely before the work starts and keep that consultation going throughout as well. Don't take any shortcuts. the consequences for poor safety can and do last a lifetime. Keep learning, keep that process of continuous improvement going, and get the right advice. Many associations have experts, as Paul pointed out, that can provide support to their members. WorkSafe have a lot of useful information on their website or through their advisory line. And again, they also offer that free workplace safety consultation service called OHS Essentials.
Oh, thank you for that, Sam. Finishing up with you, Brian, what are the takeouts from a WorkSafe perspective that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, thanks, Ling. And I think too, just on that last question I answered, and then just what Sam and Paul have just responded to, use the industry bodies, the master builders, the HIA, Volume Home Builders Safety Alliance, WorkSafe website. There's so much information out there that can be readily accessible to people to think about these things. And that question you asked me before, I mean, and I always say to people, just keep it simple. If it doesn't look right, generally it's probably not going to be right. So don't do it. And it's the same from a builder. If someone looks like they're doing something and it doesn't look right, stop them. Further to that, think about your works prior to undertaking the task. Look at what it is and think about what you actually have to do. Ensure that the highest level of protection or control that you can implement is implemented. Make sure the right procedures for working at heights and with electricity are in place and are understood by workers as well. Ensure the swims are relevant and used on site. They can be involved, all workers, as we've spoken about, in implementing them. Sam mentioned a crayon and that. Like I always say to guys, it doesn't matter. It can be written on a piece of plaster with a carpenter's pencil, as long as it identifies the risks, the controls that are going to be implemented, how they're going to be implemented, and people understand it. That's the key. Discuss it with each other. Make sure the communication is ongoing. Protect yourself, your mates, and your business and your livelihood. A lot of these guys that we're talking to out there, they put their livelihood on the line, their family homes, their businesses, everything's there, and it doesn't take much for that to be taken away if things do go wrong. So just keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible and just make sure you're looking out for each other.
Yeah, great point, Brian. Thank you to the three of you for all of your responses. I'm sure our viewers today have appreciated your insights into especially the various questions that came your way. That finishes our webinar now. So big thanks again, Brian, for joining us. Really appreciate everything you've done today.
No worries, Lingy. Thank you. It's good to be here.
And thanks to you as well, Paul. Appreciate your time.
Good on you. Thanks, Lingy.
And thanks, Sam. All the best for the rest of the day and the rest of the year.
Not a problem. You too.
It's been great having Paul, Sam and Brian with us, and also everybody who's joined in. As the guys have mentioned, the WorkSafe Victoria website has a heap of great resources, guides and tools. WorkSafe is always helping to ensure Victorian workers are supported to get through these tough times. But the fundamentals for work in the building and construction sector have never been more important. And just one thing to remember, if there is something you need or want to discuss urgently, there is the WorkSafe advisory line and emergency line. So jump onto that. And we're going to make a note on the screen shortly, a list of all the contacts that we've talked about today that you may find helpful. If you have any requests for further information, please do get in touch and we will follow up on those as soon as possible. Thank you so much for tuning in today. All the best.
Thank you.